The police lights painted my childhood home in red and blue. Neighbors stood outside in their nightgowns, whispering, pointing, waiting for me. The man who'd supposedly abandoned his house to... Screams. I parked across the street, engine still running, heart somewhere between disbelief and dread. My neighbor, old Mrs. Keller, waved her flashlight like a sword. "You need to check inside, Daniel," she said. "There was screaming coming from your house last night." Screaming. From a house that had been empty for 2 years. A house that used to smell like cinnamon and fresh laundry, my mother's touch. Now, just dust and silence. When I stepped inside, the air was cold and heavy. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. The couch, the old clock that never ticked, and the framed photo of Mom smiling beside the fireplace. Only, the frame wasn't facing the same way anymore. They said it might have been a break-in, or a wild animal, or maybe just the wind. But the thing about this house is, it never needed a reason to make noise. It already carried decades of memories, and some of them refused to stay quiet. I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone come back to a place haunted by their own past? Truth is, I didn't come back by choice. I came back because Mom's lawyer called. Something about a final letter she'd left for me. 2 years after her funeral. Yeah, timing's great, right? I thought it would be a quick trip. Grab the envelope, maybe wipe a few tears, and head back to the city. But nothing about that night was quick. Nothing about that house was over. Because when I opened her bedroom door, I felt it, the cold rush, the smell of her old perfume, and the faint sound of someone whispering my name. And in that moment, I realized the screams weren't a warning. They were a welcome. Her name was Eleanor Clark, my mother, my ghost, my unfinished story. And this was the night everything I thought I'd buried came clawing back. So if you've ever tried running from your past, thinking time heals what memory hides, sit tight, because this story isn't about haunting. It's about healing. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Long before the police lights and whispers, that house was full of life. It wasn't just brick and paint. It was a world my mother built with her bare hands and borrowed hope. Her name was Eleanor Clark, a woman who believed that faith could patch the cracks life left behind. She was a school teacher in a small Pennsylvania town, the kind who stayed after class for every child who struggled, even when it meant missing dinner. Her classroom was her stage, her chalkboard, her canvas. And for years, her laughter filled those walls like sunlight through stained glass. She wasn't supposed to end up alone in that house. Once she had a husband, my father, Thomas. They built dreams together, quiet ones, a bigger home, a garden, maybe a trip to Maine one summer. But life doesn't care about plans. It only cares about pressure. When my father's factory shut down, he fell apart slowly. First his temper, then his pride, and eventually his presence. One morning, he just left a note on the kitchen table. "Tell Daniel I'll send something when I can." He never did. I was 10. Mom didn't cry, not in front of me at least. She folded the note, placed it in a small wooden box with her wedding ring, and said, "We'll be fine." But the next morning, I caught her staring at that same empty seat across the table, whispering grace to no one. That's when everything changed. Bills piled up like fallen leaves. The house got quieter, the fridge emptier. But somehow, there was always food on my plate, even if it meant she didn't eat. I didn't realize until years later how many dinners she skipped just to make sure I had breakfast. Eleanor had dreams once. She wanted to study psychology, to understand the human mind, to help people heal. But college didn't fit between double shifts and raising a boy alone. So she traded textbooks for lesson plans, ambitions for utility bills. Still, she made magic out of scraps. She'd tape my school projects on the wall as if they were museum pieces. When I brought home a C in math, she'd say, "A C means you care, Daniel. You just haven't conquered yet." She believed words could heal almost anything, and maybe they did, for a while. But small-town whispers have sharp teeth. People talk when a husband leaves and a woman keeps her head high. They said she was too proud, too strange. That maybe she scared him off with her big dreams. I didn't understand then how cruel gossip could be, how it could hollow someone from the inside while they still smiled on the outside. Still, she kept going. She worked at the school by day and cleaned offices by night. Her hands were always cracked from chalk dust and detergent. Her shoes, worn thin but polished every morning. And every night before bed, she'd sit by that old photo frame, our family picture from better days, and whisper something I could never quite hear. Then came the sickness. It started with fatigue. "Just tired," she said. But soon she couldn't climb the stairs without pausing. Doctors called it pulmonary fibrosis, a name that sounded too gentle for something that cruel. I was 20 by then, away in college on a small scholarship, trying to build the future she'd sacrificed hers for. When I found out, she said, "Don't you dare come home. Finish what we started." I didn't listen. I packed that same night. By the time I reached her, she was sitting by the window, her oxygen tube curling like a ribbon across her lap. She looked out at the garden she once dreamed of planting, now overgrown and wild. "Looks alive, doesn't it?" she said. Even without care, things keep growing. That's who she was, finding poetry in ruin. For 2 years, I became her caretaker. Our roles reversed, me cooking, cleaning, telling jokes to distract her from the pain. She laughed easily, even when breathing wasn't easy anymore. She never wanted pity, only presence. But death is stubborn, and when it finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No thunder, no screams, just a quiet sigh, as if she'd finally found rest. I stayed in that house for weeks after the funeral, wandering from room to room, unable to pack her things. Every mug, every photo, every echo of her voice in the hallway, it all felt sacred. But grief doesn't stay poetic for long. It rots. And soon, the house began to feel heavy, suffocating, like it was breathing her absence. So I left. Sold nothing, took nothing. Just closed the door and walked away. People said it was healthy to move on. But I didn't move on. I just moved away, and that's the thing about unfinished love, it doesn't stay buried. It waits, it lingers. Sometimes in the walls that once held laughter. Sometimes in the memories that never learned how to die. I thought leaving would silence the pain. But pain doesn't vanish, it echoes. And 2 years later, when the neighbor said she heard screaming from my house, I realized something terrifying. Maybe the past doesn't haunt us. Maybe it just calls us home. The next morning, I stood in front of that house again, sunlight cutting through the mist like a slow exhale. The front porch still creaked the same way it did when I was a kid. Only now, every sound felt deliberate, like the house was speaking in its own language. I wasn't there out of bravery. I was there because of the letter, the one Mom's lawyer said she'd left for me, hidden somewhere inside. He'd sounded almost embarrassed when he called. "It's been in our office safe for 2 years, Daniel. Your mother requested it not be read until this exact week." 2 years. To the day. The same week the neighbor said she'd heard screaming. Coincidence? Maybe. But grief teaches you that coincidences can feel like messages if your heart still wants to listen. The lawyer, Mr. Ellis, was a quiet man with eyes that always looked half asleep, like he'd seen too many wills and not enough living. He handed me a small sealed envelope with my name in Mom's familiar cursive. "Open it in your own time," he said. She mentioned something about finding what's left unfinished, whatever that means. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because when I got back to the house, something felt off. Not dangerous. Just different. The air was warmer inside, as if someone had opened the windows, except they were all shut tight. And on the kitchen table, there was a mug. The same ceramic mug Mom used to drink her tea from every morning. Only this one was wet inside. I froze. No one had a key. Not even me. I had to break the back door lock to get in last night. So how did a fresh mug of tea appear in a house that hadn't been lived in for 2 years? That's when I started noticing the small things. The old radio in the corner, unplugged, but humming faintly. The smell of lavender, Mom's favorite. And the faint creak from upstairs, like someone walking slowly across the hallway. Rationally, I knew what I should have done. Left, called someone, maybe even laughed it off as my imagination. But grief isn't rational, it's magnetic. So instead, I climbed the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, the same way it used to when I'd sneak out as a teenager. At the top, the hallway stretched like a tunnel of memories. And at the very end, the door to her bedroom, slightly open. Inside, sunlight spilled across the bed, dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts. And there, sitting on the nightstand, was the photo frame, the one I'd seen downstairs last night. It had moved again. This time, the picture inside was cracked, spiderweb lines running across my mother's smile. Behind it, tucked into the frame, was a folded note. I opened it with shaking hands. If you're reading this, Daniel, it means the house has spoken to you again. Don't be afraid. What's unfinished isn't in the walls, it's in you. No signature. Just her handwriting. The same slanted cursive that once signed my report cards. For the first time in years, I cried. Not out of fear, but out of confusion. Because somehow, I felt like she was there, watching, waiting. That night, I decided to stay. I set up an old cot in the living room and kept the lights dim. It wasn't bravery, it was surrender. If the house wanted to speak, I'd listen. Around midnight, I heard it again. Not screaming, whispering. A woman's voice, faint but familiar, repeating one phrase. Don't leave it undone, Daniel. Don't leave it undone. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound. It led me to the basement door, the one I hadn't opened yet. Mom used to store everything there. Old lesson plans, boxes of books, and the wooden chest she never let me touch. When I pulled the chain light, dust filled the air. The room looked untouched. Except for one thing. The chest was open. Inside were papers, letters she'd written but never sent. Dozens of them. Each addressed to a different name I didn't recognize. And then I found one addressed to me. Not sealed, just waiting. Daniel, it began. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you everything while I was alive. I've made mistakes. Not sins of malice, but of silence. There's something in this house you must find, not for me, but for yourself. She mentioned a book, an old journal she kept hidden behind the fireplace bricks. Said it contained the truth she never spoke. I put the letter down, heart racing. Behind the fireplace bricks. I moved the grate, pushed at the loose stones, and found it. A small, leather-bound journal covered in ash and time. Inside, pages upon pages of her handwriting. But not lesson plans or diary notes. These were letters to my father. Every month. For 12 years, she'd written him constantly, even after he left. Every letter full of love, confusion, and forgiveness. She never sent them. Never showed them. Just kept writing as if her words could reach him through the air. At first, I felt angry, like she'd wasted her life talking to a man who'd never come back. But the more I read, the more I realized those letters weren't for him. They were for her. A way to keep her heart soft in a world that kept trying to harden it. And maybe that was the unfinished thing she meant. Not revenge, not regret, forgiveness, but the story didn't end there. Because on the very last page, written shakily, was something that froze my blood. If you ever hear me again, Daniel, don't be afraid. It only means I'm still protecting you. That's when the lights flickered. And from upstairs, her bedroom door slammed shut. Hope and terror. Faith and fear, all crashing together in one impossible moment. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or finding it. The storm came out of nowhere. Rain hammered the windows, wind screamed through the cracks, and the power cut out just as I reached the top of the stairs. Her bedroom door was closed again, locked. I knew what I'd find wasn't going to be normal. But by that point, I wasn't afraid of ghosts anymore, only of what they might be trying to tell me. I kicked the door open. The hinges groaned, and for a split second, everything went still. Then the lights flickered back on. Her room looked almost alive. The curtains moved without wind. The picture frames on the wall rattled. And there, sitting on her old rocking chair, was that leather-bound journal I'd found in the fireplace, open to a page I hadn't seen. He must know the truth before the house forgets. Before I could process the words, I heard it. The sound that had brought the police, that had made my neighbor panic, screaming, but it wasn't horror. It was grief, a woman's cry, raw, cracked, full of pain that didn't belong to the living. It echoed through the hallway and then through me. Every hair on my skin rose. And when I turned, the air in the room shifted. The old photo frame, our family picture, fell off the dresser and shattered on the floor. Inside the broken glass, a folded document was hidden behind the photo. A hospital report, dated 6 months before her death. It wasn't just illness. It was malpractice. Her doctor, someone I'd trusted, had misdiagnosed her, denied her a treatment trial that could have saved her. The note at the bottom read, "Patient requests this not be shared with her son." She'd known. She'd known she was dying because someone else gave up on her too soon. And she'd kept that truth buried, not to protect herself, but to protect me. That's what the screaming was. Not a haunting, a memory. The house replaying the moment she found out, when she realized her time was being stolen. The walls weren't haunted. They were holding her pain. I sank to my knees, gripping the broken frame, whispering, "Why didn't you tell me?" And for the first time, I heard her voice clearly. Gentle, close, warm like the woman who used to tuck me in. Because forgiveness doesn't live in anger, Daniel. It lives in understanding. Then silence. The radio downstairs turned on by itself. Static first. Then her voice, recorded, trembling, but unmistakable. It was her answering machine greeting. The one I'd deleted years ago. "Hi, you've reached Eleanor Clark. If I can't answer, I'm probably out teaching the world how to be kind. Leave a message and be kind, too." And I broke. Not in fear. In release, everything I'd buried, the resentment, the guilt, the self-pity, it all came rushing out. I screamed back into that house, not to banish the ghost, but to let her know I finally understood. She hadn't stayed behind to haunt me. She'd stayed behind to finish teaching me. I rushed downstairs, grabbed the letter I hadn't opened yet, the one Mr. Ellis gave me, and tore it open with shaking hands. "My darling boy," it began. "If this reaches you, it means I've kept my promise to always guide you home, even when I can't be there. You'll be angry when you learn the truth, but don't let anger build walls. Let it build wisdom. The man who made the mistake that took my life, forgive him. Not for him, for you, so you can live light." Tears blurred the words. "And when the house calls, listen. It only calls when you're ready to remember that love doesn't die. It just changes form." Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain softened into a steady rhythm. The whole house seemed to breathe again, the walls no longer tense, the air warm like a heartbeat. Then, from the basement, a crash. I ran down. The wooden chest had fallen open again, but this time there was something new inside. A small box I'd never seen before. Inside it, Mom's wedding ring. And beneath it, a check made out to her name, a malpractice settlement, unclaimed, signed months after her death. She had found justice. But she'd left the reward untouched, meant for me to find only when I was ready to forgive. The irony hit me like thunder. The screaming wasn't about pain. It was about closure. A voice trying to tell me, it's time to stop running. The next morning, I walked to the hospital where her doctor still practiced. I handed him a copy of her letter and the report. He went pale, apologized, tried to explain. But I didn't want an explanation. I just said, "She forgave you before I did. Don't waste it." His eyes filled with tears. And for the first time since she died, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind you find in silence. The kind you earn through understanding. That night, I went back to the house one last time. The photo frame sat on the mantel again, perfectly placed, unbroken. The radio played softly in the background, Mom's favorite song. And when I whispered, "I forgive you too," the light in her room flickered once. Then stayed on. That was the night the haunting ended, and the healing began. Dear audience, if you're feeling the chills but also the warmth of a mother's love, don't forget to give this story a like. It really helps more story lovers find us. The house feels different now, lighter. Every corner that once whispered sorrow now hums softly with calm. It's as if the walls finally exhaled after holding their breath for years. I no longer avoid the stairs or the old rooms. I walk through them with the quiet respect of someone visiting a sacred place. Because that's what it has become. Not a haunted house, but a monument of love that refused to die quietly. The day after the storm, I began packing her things. Not to erase her, but to honor her. For every letter, photograph, and keepsake I touched, I felt her presence, not watching, but guiding. In one drawer, I found her teaching certificates and the notes from her students. Handwritten messages from kids she'd inspired over the years. You taught me kindness. You made me believe I was enough. You said mistakes don't make us bad people. They make us human. I realized those words weren't just for them. They were for me, too. That afternoon, I took her ring, the one from the box, and visited the hill behind the house where she used to sit with her morning tea. The view stretched wide and endless, a horizon she never got to see again. I placed the ring in the soil beneath her favorite oak tree and whispered, "You can rest now, Mom." The wind picked up gently, carrying the scent of rain and pine. And for the first time, I didn't feel her presence around me. I felt it within me. From that day forward, I stopped chasing ghosts and started chasing purpose. I used part of the malpractice settlement, the one she left untouched, to create something in her name, the Eleanor Clark Foundation for Compassion in Medicine. It funds ethical training and patient support programs for hospitals across the state. Her story became a case study, not of tragedy, but of transformation. Doctors now read about her not as a victim, but as a teacher. The same woman who once taught children how to be kind now teaches healers how to stay human. And me, I became the program's director, not because I wanted to lead, but because I finally understood what leadership meant, carrying someone's light forward when they can't anymore. The first time I spoke publicly about her story, I could barely hold my voice steady. But when I looked out at the audience, doctors, nurses, students, I saw tears. And I realized something powerful. Her screaming had never been to scare me. It was to wake me up. To remind me that pain ignored becomes poison, but pain faced becomes purpose. Years passed quietly after that. The house stayed empty for a while, but not forgotten. Eventually, I sold it to a young couple who said they felt peace the moment they walked in. I smiled and said, "She'll take good care of you." Now, I live in a small apartment in the city. It's not fancy, but it's filled with light, books, and laughter. Things I once thought I'd lost forever. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I make tea and play her favorite song on the radio. The same one that played the night she said goodbye, and in those quiet moments, I feel her near, not as a ghost, but as a gentle reminder. Love doesn't vanish with death. It simply finds a new way to be heard. Last month, I received a letter from her old student, now a doctor. He wrote, "I was in your seminar today. When you spoke about your mother, I realized I was becoming the kind of doctor who forgets to care. Thank you for reminding me why I started this journey. I read it 3 times. Then I laughed through tears, because I knew she'd be proud, not of what I'd done, but of what I'd become. The house that once held screams now echoes through every life it's touched. Every patient treated with empathy, every doctor who remembers to listen, every son who chooses forgiveness over fury. That's her legacy. She used her final breaths not to haunt me, but to heal me. Not to hold me back, but to set me free. And as I close this chapter, I know one truth with certainty. Some stories don't end when someone dies. They end when love finally finds peace. So if you ever hear a scream in the dark, don't run, listen, because sometimes it's not a ghost calling for fear. It's a soul calling for forgiveness. The night I finally understood that, I turned off the lights, whispered, "Good night, Mom?" And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of peace, full of love, full of everything she left behind for me to find. And that was the night the house stopped remembering pain and started remembering love. Thanks for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it, because somewhere someone else needs to remember that even the loudest screams can lead to the quietest peace.